Hey guys, welcome back to the Gabriel Farmstead. My name is Rebecca, and today we are talking about food preservation. So the other day we decided that it was time to put in the spring garden. The video is coming, and we decided to take out our beetroots, like all of them, that whole bed, harvested, done. And so we were left with quite an amount of beetroot that we needed to figure out how we are going to store. And that is what inspired today's video. So today we are going to talk about different ways how we can preserve beetroot and talk about some of the advantages and probably some of the disadvantages. So let's jump right into it. So we know our beetroot and we love them. We plant a variety called dextrose red, I think dextrose Detroit red, something like that. But it's a beautiful variety. It's very sweet, doesn't get woody, so we love it. And that brings me to the first way. If you want to have beetroot for longer and keep it fresher, it's better for you to leave it in the soil. So for as long as you can, if you don't have a bed that you really need to use, or you have all the land and you can afford to keep it in the soil, keep it there. That is now dependent on the variety that you're growing. Given that your variety is beautiful, sweet, doesn't get woody or tougher when it stays in the soil longer, then you can leave it there. The advantages, you don't have to deal with it. Like when you really want to have beetroots for that day, you go out to the garden, you pull out a few that you want to use, you use them up, and you don't have to think, oh my goodness, what am I going to do with the leftover beetroot that I'm not using right now? The second way to preserve is to store them whole. Yes, you heard me, to store them whole. Like you cut off the leaves and that's it. But there's a difference when you are cutting off your leaves. Make sure to cut leaving the stem, because that then means your beetroot can store longer. You don't necessarily need to wash it either, but you can just rub off the extra soil or extra sand so that you don't take it with you to your storage or in the house, and then you leave it like that. The thing is, when you cut into your beetroot, that part that you have cut can scab over, but it is also still very prone to bacterials. So if you want to keep your harvest fresher and bacteria free, not rotting for longer, then you want to store them whole. This is beautiful because you don't have to think of freezing, you don't need to think about anything else. But then there are specifications as to how you should store them. You should store them in an opaque container that doesn't allow light through. It should be breathable or aerated, something like a wool sack, a plastic bag, not plastic bag, but paper bag. Avoid plastic bags, guys. Your produce is going to rot because they won't have air in there. So paper bag. For me, I am storing mine in a potato bag that I went to the market and bought potatoes previously in there. And because I don't have much, it fits perfectly in my bag, and that is where I'm keeping it. And as you can see, the bag is a paper bag. It is ventilated and it's opaque enough. It's not going to let light through. And then I keep it in my pantry because it needs to be kept in a cool, dry place. Now, when you live in Namibia, cool places are hard to come by, but I'm very lucky to have a pantry that is much cooler than the rest of the house. I'm not saying it's very cold that it's going to store for months, but it's likely to go maybe for a month or longer in there. Well, the third method of preserving your beetroot is by blanching and freezing. Now let's talk a little bit about blanching. What is blanching? Blanching is a method of pre-cooking your vegetables before you put them into the freezer. So blanching simply means you boil your water. When it comes to a rapid boil, you put in your veggies, you let it come back to a rolling boil. That will probably take a minute to 3 minutes, and then you take the produce out of the boiling water into very cold water, if possible cold water with ice. And what this does is that it stops the cooking process and allows your veggies or your produce to retain all those vitamins and the minerals, because you didn't cook it all the way through. And it makes freezing easier. Your veggies are not going to spoil. Now, I have read somewhere that with beetroots, you are able to just cut them up and put them in the freezer. But having blanched my veggies, it have kind of just become a culture. So I don't really freeze my veggies whole just like that anymore. I always tend to blanch them before I freeze them. The disadvantage for blanching and freezing is that you need freezer space, especially if you have a bigger garden with much more produce. Now, when it comes to me, I am lucky because my garden is fairly small. It's for home consumption, but also because I don't have a big freezer, guys. My fridge is quite small, just enough for my family and I. It's my dream to get a chest freezer or a deep freezer in the future, and to get just a bigger freezer also in the kids, as the kids are growing and the family is growing, because the fridge that I'm having right now is definitely not going to retain us much longer. But anyways, there you have it. The third way to preserve your produce is something that we inherited from our forefathers. I've seen my great-grandmother do it. I've seen my grandmother do it. I've seen my parents do it. And now I'm doing it, and I'm going to pass it on to my kids. And this is drying. So drying have been an old way of preservation of food, from fruits to vegetables to meat, you name it, we have dried it. The good thing with drying is you don't need freezer space, you don't need electricity, you don't need gas. All you need is sun, and we have plenty of sun in Namibia. So it's much more easier to dry your food, because it's more like a God-given process for us Namibian, and probably also Africans in general. You could correct me on that one if I'm wrong. So the third way is to dry your beetroots. You cut them into these very thin slices using your knife, or if you have those beautiful peelers that process food and cuts them into very thin slices, you could also do that. I'm cutting mine with a knife, just thinly, and then when you're done with it, you put them in a single layer in a baking sheet, or if you have a table to use, you could even put them on the table, and you put them in the sun, or you can keep them somewhere where there is enough air to dry completely. So now when it is dry, you are able then to use it, rehydrate it when you want to cook it. I don't think it will have quite the same texture as that it will retain when you have frozen it, or when you are eating it fresh from the garden, but it's certainly palatable. You can also add it to your stews and your soups. It just makes for a delicious way to preserve your vegetables. It also reduces food waste, especially in rural areas, because that is where we don't quite have freezers. If you live in a country where there's not enough sun, I have seen the American and Canadian YouTubers are using dehydrators and they are using freeze dryers. That is something I have not quite seen in a lot of, I actually have not seen it in Africa, but I'm sure there probably are households out there that are having dehydrators, so you could use that. There is a bonus way to preserve your food that I'm going to share with you, but I have to be honest and tell you that I don't really use this process, and this is powdering your beetroots. So you dry them, and then when you have dried them, you can put them in a grinder and just grind them, or you can put them like I'm using. I am using my blender. So the bad thing with using my blender is that it doesn't really become powdery, although you can use it. So if you have a food grinder or food processor, that is even better. You grind it into powder, and you can use that powder as a natural dye in your food. African households have this thing of cooking rice with curry to become yellow. If you wanted to become innovative and have pink or purple rice, you could always add some of this powder. You could also add it to your baking, to your frosting, if you are baking your cakes or whatever, and then you just wanted the icing to be pink and you didn't want to use an artificial colorant. Or you could also use it in clothing, maybe to dye your clothes and so forth. This is really a way for you to become creative and innovative and see how you could use that dye. So guys, those were the 5 ways you could preserve your beetroot. Thank you so much for being here with me. My favorite out of those is storing them whole, and also drying is quite practical for me because I don't have a big freezer. But I would recommend that you keep it whole. If I had a bigger harvest, I would keep most of it pretty much whole and just store it in an open container. Keep it in a cool, dry place and eat it fresh. There's nothing like fresh food that you have grown yourself organically, no chemicals, knowing exactly what have gone into the production of your own food. So do not waste your food after spending so much time and energy and sleepless nights and sweats trying to grow this food. Guys, thank you so much for being with me. I do appreciate you. Thank you so much for subscribing to my channel. I appreciate you guys and I love you so much. I will see you the next one. Get preserving your food.